Are you guys ready to make the most adorable little girls' dresses? I'm Wendy, and I was the owner of Whimsical Wendy and Main Street Mouse Gear, By the Bay Bag Co., Maddie Jean's Closet back in the day. I have had so many online stores that have gotten renamed over the years. But in 2012, I started making these little Disney princess inspired dresses and started selling them on Etsy when Etsy first started, and they took off. I have sold hundreds and hundreds of these dresses. I stopped making these almost a decade ago when I started my knitting bag company, By the Bay Bag Co. Um, so I haven't made them in a very, very long time, but I had a very sweet customer from 15 years ago reach out to me and wanted me to recreate her order that she had for her girls when her girls were little. Her girls are now grown, and she said that they wore them out and wore them to death. And so she just wanted me to recreate them so she would have them in her stash for whenever she had grandkids or, like, just as a memory because they meant so much to her. But I used to make these Disney princess inspired dresses and a lot of other Disney characters along the way, because of course I'm a huge Disney adult and Disney is one of my loves. And so I would sell these in sets of threes, six, and 12. And you could pick whatever princesses you wanted, and from my list that I had. And I would get pictures all the time of families at Disney World with my dresses on. And one of the best memories I have of these is actually twice going to Disney World and seeing someone in one of my outfits at Disney World. I designed them to be made out of cotton, so they were washable. They were cool in the hot, hot weather. They were comfortable for little girls because I know a lot of the princess dresses are made out of super itchy material. And when you get hot and sweaty in the 100-degree weather, you've got a kid that's not comfortable, they're itchy, they're crying, and like a lot of it has to do with the princess dress. So I wanted something that little girls could wear, be cool and comfortable in the hot Florida weather, but still look like their favorite little Disney princesses. So after so many years and having this customer reach out to me, I was like, you know what? I really should just go ahead and write out the instructions. I had all of my patterns from back in the day that I drafted. I even had like some laminated templates. They were all stashed away. These really tattered paper patterns I had stashed away in a box, and I said, I should pull them out and I should share them with everybody. Since I'm on a mission to release a sewing pattern every week this year of 2025, I thought this is the perfect time because I'm going to be making the dresses to recreate her order. So then I'll have samples to take pictures of, and I can video it along the way to give you guys instructions on how to do it. So I'm going to show you a few of the ones that I've already gotten done, and then I will walk you through how to make one of the basic dresses. And then in the instructions, I'm going to include some instructions on how to do some of the embellishments for like an overskirt, or like the zigzag trim on the bottom of the Tinkerbell dress that I used to do, the ruffles that I put on Belle, all of the different embellishments. But with this basic peasant dress shape, you can make it into any character that you want. You could even not make a character. My daughter had one of these out of solid white, and we took portraits one time when she was little, out of these under some big fancy oak trees that were super, super old, and in a park. And it was magical. And so you could really make these any color you want, but I've always made them Disney princess inspired. So first we have Anna, and see, it's just a color block. It gives the illusion of Anna, but your little girl is going to be nice and cool. And it's got elastic in the sleeves that's comfortable. It's got an elastic neckline. Everything on the inside, I serge with my serger, but you could cut it with pinking shears. You could zigzag the seam if you don't have a serger. Like I always say in all of my sewing patterns, the possibilities are endless. Use your imagination, let it run wild. So I've got Rapunzel, and then we've got Tiana. So I'll show you how to do some of these overskirts in the pattern. I'm not going to go over them in the video because basically you cut out a certain shape, you hem the bottom of it, and then you When you do the gathering stitch for the top of the skirt, you just add that piece in and gather it with the skirt. So they're super, super simple to put together, but you can, cut them in all different shapes, let your imagination go wild. This one is Anna, but I've also used this fabric for Cinderella before. And then we've got Sleeping Beauty, Princess Aurora. And then one of my favorites is Belle. And I always add in the red bows and the red ribbon to give that, that hint of the rose from Beauty and the Beast. So if you guys are ready to make one of these adorable peasant princess dresses, keep watching. Okay, the supplies you're going to need for your princess inspired dresses are going to be some quilt cotton. I've always gotten mine from Hobby Lobby, even when I was making these years and years and years ago. Hobby Lobby had the best selection of prints that I needed in and carried them the most consistently. So that's where I got all of my fabric for today. I got it from Hobby Lobby. But you can find whichever prints suit your inspiration needs to create your princesses. So like this example is going to be Elsa. And so you'll also need the pattern, which is a PDF. You'll print out all your pattern pieces. I even dug out my old templates that I had made so that because I cut out so many of them all those years ago while I was making so many of these. So you'll need one set for your sleeves and one set for your front and back of your bodice. And then you'll also need fabric for your skirt. And it will, in the pattern, I give you all of the measurements of how wide and how long to cut the skirt pieces. They're all rectangles, so that's very simple. You'll need some clips or some pins. You'll need scissors, of course, a marking pen. You'll need some 1/4-inch elastic and thread to match. And of course, your sewing machine and all of the usual stuff that you need to sew with. I will say that I finished the insides of these on a serger. If you don't have a serger, you can do a zigzag stitch on all the seams, or you can cut them with pinking shears if you want to. But I've always done it on a serger, so everything has a finished seam on the inside. Some of the other things that you might think about for embellishing your princess is it depends on like what their dress traditionally looks like. So for this this example, I have cut out fabric for Aurora or Sleeping Beauty. So I've got the light pink for the sleeves, the dark pink for the bodice, and then the dark pink for the skirt. But in order to create the points of her overskirt, I have cut a piece of the light pink and I've cut points into it. So when I sew this, the points will end up on the side and it will go up in the middle of the front. So it kind of looks like her dress. So I'll give some little hints and tips and tricks in the pattern for that too, for all the different princesses that I've traditionally done. You can feel free to make it your own. This example is going to be Rapunzel. So I've got light purple for the sleeves and a dark purple for the bodice, and then a light purple for the skirt of her dress. But on the bodice, I'm going to take light pink grosgrain ribbon, and I'm going to sew it in kind of a crisscross fashion with a bow at the top, kind of like a corset, which is kind of the same design that's on her dress. Also, let's see, I have a Tiana cut out. I also have in this stack over here, I have a bell cut out. And so for hers, the whole dress is yellow, of course. And so in order to make it a little bit more like Belle, I've got the sleeves and the bodice cut out of the yellow fabric. And then I've got the skirt cut out. But in addition to the skirt, I cut 2 strips the width of the fabric so that I can make a ruffle at the bottom. And then I add little red grosgrain bows on it to kind of give the hint of like the red rose in Beauty and the Beast. So there's tons of different ways that you can embellish these to kind of come up with your own kind of your own take on the princesses. I'll give you hints and tips on the way that I've always done it. Like I said, I've sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these dresses back when I was doing these exclusively on my Etsy shop, and it was always so cool to see them in the Disney parks with my dresses on that I had created. So fun. So anyway, those are all the supplies you're going to need. Kind of very basic, very simple for making a cotton dress. So let's get started. Okay, you're gonna have to kind of forgive my very crowded setup here. So I've got my serger set up over on this side and my regular sewing machine on this side, because I don't have anywhere else to put my serger. So we're gonna be a little crowded in here. But the first step is we're going to take our bodice piece, and we're gonna sew one of them right sides together with one of our sleeve pieces, and we're gonna sew it along this curve right here. So right sides together, and then you're going to pin or clip this edge, and then you're going to sew this curved edge right here at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So it should look like this. And then you're going to take it and you're going to open it up, and you're going to alternate these. So the next one is going to be the other bodice piece. So right sides together with that sleeve, and you're going to sew that same curve on there. You want to make sure that you're alternating bodice, sleeve, bodice, and then sleeve, and then you're going to sew those two together to make a loop. So we got the bodice, so we're going to do the other sleeve, right sides together, 1/4 inch seam allowance. And since this is such a short seam, I generally don't really pin it when I'm making these, but if you need to pin it or clip it so it stays together. Okay, so then you're going to end up with this long stretch of bodice, sleeve, bodice, sleeve. So then you're going to put the two open ends together, right sides together, and it's going to create a loop. So you're going to do that last curved seam. Okay, so you've ended up with your loop. Now, I take mine to the serger and I finish each one of these seams before I move on. If you don't have a serger, you can always do a zigzag stitch on your machine, or you can just cut these with pinking shears if that's all you have. But since I have a serger, I'm going to use that. Now, I am not a pro at a serger, so I'm not going to give you any serger tips, but get you set up. Okay, so I'm not a serger pro by any means. I've used one forever, for decades, but I don't know all the technical ins and outs of all the different uses of a serger. So I'm just going to show you me serging it. I'm not going to go over how to use a serger and all of that. There's plenty of people who online that can tell you how to do all of that. But this is how I finish the seams. I just go around the curve and serge each one of these curved seams. So if you've never used a serger, what it does is it loops all of these threads around to finish that seam, and so that this won't fray. So if you have a chance to use a serger, by all means, grab one and use one. They are fantastic. If you make a lot of clothing, it just gives it so much more of a professional finish. A lot of people are scared of sergers because it does cut off. There is a blade in here, so it does cut off fabric as you're sewing, so you have to be kind of careful. If you really mess up on a serger, you've really messed up. But if you're careful, you keep your fingers away from it, and you watch where you're going, they're wonderful. Once you have all 4 of those serged and you've trimmed all of your little serger tails off, If you don't have a serger, this is how you're going to finish the top. You're going to take this raw edge at the top and you're going to take it over to your ironing board and you're going to iron this down 1/4 inch, and then you're going to fold it down a little bit more than 1/4 inch. This calls for 1/4 inch elastic, so you want to make sure that this casing is going to be wide enough for your 1/4 inch elastic to go through. I'll give you the measurements in the pattern of how far down to fold that. But so you'll want to press that all the way around so that it will stay. You can pin it in place if you need to. If you do have a serger, however, the way I've always done it is I've serged this top edge so that I only have to fold it down one time because that edge will be finished, and then I run my elastic through there. So let me show you that. I just go all the way around the top edge of the bodice and sleeve pieces. Okay, so once that edge is finished with your serger or you've pressed it, I'm going to go take this over to my ironing board and I'm going to press this down. Once you have it pressed down and you have it pinned in place, you're going to start in the center back. So you just pick one of your bodice pieces to be the back because they're both the same. And you're going to mark an opening about 1.5 inches wide at the center back. This is going to be where you're going to start your seam and you're going to stop your seam. So there'll be an opening right here in the casing for you to insert your elastic in. So I'm going to go give this a press and then I'll be right back. I have mine pressed and I've marked my little opening in the center there. So what you're going to do is you're going to sew from this mark around to the other mark, back stitching at the beginning and the end. You need to leave this open so that we can insert your elastic in there. But if you've serged it, or if not, and you folded it under, you're just going to sew just along this edge right here to create a casing at the top for your elastic. And you're going to sew all the way around the top. Oops, my thread came undone. Okay, I'm going to trim my threads. And so you should have a casing that goes around the top. So now I'm going to take my elastic and I'm going to use a safety pin. Okay, I'm going to insert my elastic using a safety pin. So I'm going to put my safety pin in the end of the elastic, and I always like to take a straight pin and pin the other end of my elastic to my garment whenever I'm inserting elastic. That way you don't accidentally pull it inside the casing and then have to start all over. So I'm going to take this, and I think because all of my seam allowances got pushed going that way, I'm going to follow that direction. It'll just make it easier to insert your elastic. So you just use that safety pin and push it down a little ways and then pull it. And then push it down a little bit more and pull. And you're going to do this all the way around. Okay, when you get to the end, you're going to pull your elastic out. And then, see, that one almost sucked up in there. Good thing I had it pinned. Grab the other end of your elastic and hold on to it tight when you take that pin out. And now we're just going to sew over the ends of this elastic to make it. So now we're just going to sew over these two pieces of elastic to create the loop. So I just put it in there and I just go back and forth. Do that about 5 or 6 times, just enough to make sure it's going to hold. And then you let it suck back up in there. I like to give it a good stretch that kind of evens out all of the gathers. And I'm going to hold this straight, and I'm going to finish this seam between those two start and stop points. And trim off any of my excess threads. Okay, so that's going to create the casing at the top of your dress. So that's going to be the neckline of your dress. Now we're going to do the sleeves. Okay, in order to finish the sleeves, we're kind of going to do the same thing as we did with the neckline. You can take this and fold this under a 1/4 of an inch and then fold it up to create the casing, or I'm going to serge the edges of the sleeves and then fold it up just like I did for the neckline and then sew across there. Once you have that pressed, you're going to take it to your sewing machine and you're going to do the same thing that you did on the neckline. You're going to just sew right along that edge, creating that casing. Okay, so you've created your casing at the end of your sleeve, and now we're going to insert the elastic before we sew up the side seam, and then that way it'll catch the edges of the elastic in the side seam. So we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to insert the safety pin into the elastic and start it in that casing. And since this is a straight shot, I get it kind of going in there slowly so that I can tell before it sucks up in there, and I can pin it. So once it gets to be pretty close to the edge, I'm going to stick a pin in like that so it will not go all the way through. Okay, and when it comes out the other end, I like to hold that, take the safety pin out, and I'm going to stick another pin in so that that end doesn't suck back up in there. And then we're going to take these two edges and we're going to match them up. And I'll just use a little clip. And then we're going to match up the underarm seam. And I like to press the seam allowance down towards the body. And we're going to sew this underarm seam and the side seam at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, I've always sewn over pins. I know a lot of people don't like to. I generally sew over them, but I'll take them out for this video because I know there's the pin police out there. You just want to make sure that your elastic is still sticking out of the casing right here a little bit, because you're going to sew over both those elastics lined up. And I like to back stitch back and forth right there at the edge. That didn't cut my thread. Okay, so once you have your armhole sewn up, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to serge this edge to finish it off. Okay, now I know that there are different ways to tie off your serger threads. I literally have sold hundreds of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, I've literally sold hundreds of these dresses over the years, and I just clip it off right there, and I've never had a problem with it. But if you have a different way of tying off your serger thread, you can do that. So now your underarm seam is finished, your arm seam is finished, and your neckline is finished. I'm going to go finish the other side, and then we'll turn it right side out, and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, once you have both of your sleeves done, this is what it should look like inside out. So once you get it all turned right side out, I like to give my elastic a little tug to get all the gathers nice and even. So here's what we're looking like. So we've got our little sleeves and our little bodice. All right, before we move on, we're going to find the center of the front and back of our bodice so we know where to place our skirt piece. So I'm just going to fold this in half, make sure I have it pulled all the way out. And I'm just going to make a little tiny clip right here to make a little triangle in both the front and the back. Make sure I get both pieces. And that way I don't lose the front and back marks, center marks of my front and backs. So this is what we're looking like. It's kind of looking a little Elsa-ish. Also, I like to add my bow on. If I'm going to add a bow at the neckline, I will generally do it over where I connected these on the back side. So I'll do a little bow and sew it on right here so it'll cover that up. If you're not putting a bow on the bodice, then that is going to be the back so that the front is nice and smooth. All right, let's move on to our skirt. Now, the skirt for most of the princess dresses, all of them starts out with just a rectangle that we gather at the top and we hem the bottom and we add it to the bodice. So that creates the skirt portion of it. The larger sizes take two pieces to put together to create the skirt. So they will have two side seams and then gathers at the top and hems at the bottom. If you need to embellish your skirt for whichever princess you're doing, some of them I will do an overskirt. So I will gather them together at the same time so that I'm only sewing them onto the bodice once. Some of the skirts I do a ruffle at the bottom, so I will do the ruffle before I add it to the bodice. That way it's smaller pieces that I'm working with. But for good old Elsa here, we just have a plain skirt. So we're going to start out by folding this right sides together. And as you can see, I have left the selvages on here. I'm going to end up serging those off, so I just leave them on whenever I cut the skirt piece out. So we're going to fit right sides together, and we're going to clip this edge. And then I'm going to sew this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but I'm going to sew it at 1/4 inch from where that white part ends into my fabric. So because I'm going to serge this selvage off anyway. You can cut them off if you need to, just to keep track of that, but I generally don't. Okay, now I'm going to take this over to my serger and I'm going to serge this seam. This is going to end up being the back seam of the smaller sizes of your dress. Like I said, if you do some of the larger sizes, you'll need two pieces. So you'll do this twice to put the two pieces together with the side seams, right sides together, and then serge both of those seams. And then those will end up being side seams. But if you only have one piece of fabric, this is going to be your back seam. Okay, so we have our seam finished with the serger. Clip those extra threads off. And now I like to hem mine before I add the gathers on the top. That way it's still flat. You can do a traditional hem on this where you fold it up the 1/4 inch and then you're going to fold it up another 1/4 or a 1/2 inch, however big you want your hem. You could do that. But because I have my serger, I'm going to serge the bottom edge and then only fold it up once. Okay, now that I have that serged, I'm going to take this over to my iron and I'm going to fold it up 1 inch and press. And then you can either pin it, clip it, or just wing it like I do. Okay, little tip. When you're ironing your hem down, leave the fold where the fabric was folded originally, because that'll mark the center of your front. And then I press the sides nice and sharp so that I have the sides marked also. Otherwise, you need to mark the center front and the two sides. And then you have your seam, of course, on the center back, because that's going to be helpful for placement when we gather it and place it on the bodice. But I just do that with my iron. I just press a crease in there. All right, starting at the back seam, you're just going to hem this all the way around. So whether you have serged this edge or you have folded it under another 1/4 inch, you're just going to sew right along that edge, creating your hem. Okay, back stitch at the beginning and the end, and then trim off any little stray thread you may have. Okay, so then we have our hem done all the way around the bottom. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to start at the back seam at the top raw edge, and you are going to put your stitch length as long as it will go on your sewing machine. Mine goes up to a 7, and you're just going to make a basting stitch or a gathering stitch all the way around. Do not back stitch when you're doing a gathering stitch. And when you get to the end, you're just going to lift your needle and pull your thread out so you leave a tail. My machine has an automatic thread cutter, so my tail at the beginning is not that long, so I have to be a little bit careful, otherwise that one will pull out. Also, you are doing your basting gathering stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. I forgot to say that. So now we're going to take the top of our skirt, and we're going to take our bodice, and we're going to find the center back of our bodice, which is where we connected those two when we closed up the hole where we inserted our elastic. And remember, we marked the center of that. We're going to put this upside down with the right side out inside your skirt. So your skirt is wrong side out, your bodice is right side out. So you're putting the right sides together, and I'm just going to match up that back seam with the center back of my bodice, and I'm going to pin that. And then I'm going to match up the center front of my bodice with that fold on the front of our skirt in the center. That's why it was important to leave that fold on your fabric. And then where I pressed and I marked the center sides of my fabric, I'm going to match those up with the side seams. Okay, and once you have all of that pinned, let me move that out of the way so we've got some room. You're going to pull your bobbin thread. So in my case, because I sewed with the wrong side up, that's the thread on the right side of my fabric. You're going to pull that bobbin thread until it starts gathering your fabric. And you should just be able to slide your fabric down that bobbin thread to create gathers. So what I like to do is I like to get this quadrant gathered and make sure all my little gathers are spaced out evenly. And then I pin them into place. And this is where quite a few pins will come in handy. You can also use clips. I kind of think pins work a little bit better for this. But you just want to get all those little gathers evenly spaced out, put quite a few pins in there to keep that in place. And then I go around to the front quadrant, and what I do for the front is I find the center front where that pin was, and I use a stiletto or another straight pin or the ends of my scissors, and I will slip it up under one of those stitches and give it a little pull so that I can gather from the center front and work my gathers towards the side seam, or not side seam, well, the side seam of the bodice, but the side of the skirt. Because sometimes when you're trying to pull it from the back all the way around to the front, sometimes your thread will break. Sometimes it'll get bound up in like some of these loose threads from the edges of your fabric and it won't pull. So I just find it easier to do quadrants rather than trying to do like the whole half of the skirt on one side and then the other. So I'll just pull my bobbin thread up here in the center and then make some gathers. I'm going to pin those, and then I'm going to repeat that on the other side. So you can use the same little loop of thread that you pulled up. You're just going to grab the other side of it to do the other quadrant. So if you did a larger size of this one is a size 3. If you've done a larger size where you've had to join the 2 panels for your skirt, you will have side seams on your skirt that will match up with the side seams of your bodice. But most of the smaller sizes just only require 1 skirt panel. Okay, the last quadrant, I'm going to go back here to my back seam and find the bobbin thread for that side. Gotten all tangled up back here. There we go. And gather this last quadrant. And it also helps when you're gathering, if you kind of pull at the bottom of your skirt to get all of these gathers going straight up and down. Otherwise, you could get a piece that like folds over a little wonky. And if you sew over that, it's just going to be wonky on the front too. So I always like to make sure all my gathers are going straight up and down. Okay, once you have all of those, I like to take these gathering threads and kind of move them out of the way. You're going to put this on your sewing machine like this. So if you have a free arm machine and you can make it go around the base of your machine, that works the best. Mine is not a free arm machine. I just have it up on some little rubber feet so that I can slip stuff underneath my machine. Most domestic machines that you have at your house will have a thing that you can take off and you'll have a free arm where you can sew things around the bottom here. If not, do your best to put it in like this and just don't sew over the other side. Okay, move those gathering stitches out of the way. We're going to sew this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I like to go slow, and I kind of like to manipulate my little gathers in here so that they all are super even and all going straight up and down the skirt. Oh, also, don't forget to turn your stitch length back down to a normal stitch length. Mine is at a 3.5. And back stitch at the beginning and the end. It also helps if you go really slow, number 1. And number 2, if you keep checking to make sure that your bodice is laying flat underneath here. So your bodice piece should be laying nice and flat. So you don't want any accidental folds that you sew over or little creases that you sew over. Because I have done that before, and then you have to end up using your seam ripper to pick it out and start over. So just go slow and keep adjusting as you go to make sure everything sews in there nice and straight. Back stitch when you get back to the beginning, and then you have your skirt sewn on. I've sewed over some of these threads. This fabric seems to be raveling a lot more than some. That's another reason why I really like the serger, because it finishes it off, and so if you have really ravelly fabric, it will take care of that. So I'm going to take this over the serger, and I'm going to keep it folded like this, and I'm going to serge that edge. You can zigzag it. You could also do it with the pinking shears if you need to. This is going to take care of cutting off all of these extra threads and cleaning up that edge. once you have that edge finished, you are done. Turn your dress right side out, give it a good shake, and you are done. And then you have the sweetest little peasant dress that is princess themed. You could theme these for anything, really. So that's the back. And this is the front. I'm going to go give the whole thing a really good press. Now, for my Elsa's, I don't really add anything else because her dress, honestly, in the animated movie is quite plain as far as like colors and embellishments and stuff. So this one turned out to be a little bit plain. But let me finish some of the other ones and then I will show you all of those. All right, are you guys ready to see what some of these cute dresses look like? I've gotten quite a few of them done. I still have a few more to do. I'm going to include directions, but maybe not a video on how to do some of the overskirts in the printed instructions because there's so many different variations. You kind of have to use your imagination and kind of come up with things on your own. But for a few of them, I'll add some like templates on how I cut them out and how I add them into the skirt. So this is the bell inspired one. So it's got little red bows, ruffles at the bottom. It's all yellow. And then we have Sleeping Beauty, Princess Aurora. So I'm going to show how to do like the overskirts like this. So when you do the overskirts, you add it into the waist when you do the gathering stitch around the top of the skirt piece, all as one piece, and then you add it to the bodice all as one piece. So makes it super easy to put in. Adds a little color flair to different dresses. This one is an Elsa inspired. Like I said when I was making that one, Elsa is kind of hard to do because her dress is all like basically one color. So you got to kind of use your imagination on a few of them. This one is Princess Tiana. So I'm thinking I might add a little yellow bow to this one just to give it a little bit because it's a lot of green at the top. Again, overskirt, use your imagination on how you cut it out to add the petals and all of that. This one is Rapunzel. Now, when I used to make these a long time ago, I had a specific printed purple fabric that was printed on the bottom and it had swirls and it kind of looked like the lanterns on the movie. They don't make that fabric anymore, so we had to go with all solid colors on that one. And then we got Anna. So we've got the little yellow bow at the top. And you could really add a lot of things to these. So like I know Anna's dress has a lot of embroidery and stuff at the bottom. You could very easily, well, not really very easily, but you could add more stuff to that. So this is just like a basic template. So you can embellish it however you want to make it look like any character that you want. I've also done red and white polka dots for Minnie Mouse. I did one for Mickey Mouse that was color blocked in Mickey Mouse colors with some big yellow buttons on it. I have done Donald Duck, the Goofy. I've done like all the characters. I have done an inspired dress for back when I used to sell these. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Great little summer dress for your little girls, especially when you make it out of cotton. Super cool, breathable, not itchy. All the things. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know if you ever have any questions. I'm always here to answer any sewing questions that you might have. Also, if you stumbled upon this video and you have no idea how to sew, I also have an online sewing course called Quick Stitch Academy. So I'll link all of that down below. It's a work at your own pace video tutorial course where I teach you all of the basics all the way up to making a few projects. So anyway, check out the description box for the pattern for these, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video.